If someone had told me a year ago that my quiet, meticulously ordered life would be upended by a hurricane and a man who was essentially a human hurricane himself, I would have politely returned my book to the shelf and walked away. My world was built on quiet predictability. It was a fortress of solitude constructed from the Dewey Decimal System, the scent of aging paper, and the rhythmic, soothing crash of the Pacific against the shores of Port Blossom. It was safe. It was mine. And then there was Lieutenant Marcus Thorne. He was not a part of my world. He was a force of nature that occasionally passed through it, leaving eddies of disruption in his wake. He was the ranking Coast Guard officer in our small town, a man carved from the same granite as the cliffs he protected, broad-shouldered, sharp-jawed, with eyes the color of the sea just before storm. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of absolute confidence, a confidence I could only read about in the biographies of long-dead explorers. I saw him mostly from a distance, a flash of his crisp, dark uniform at the corner diner, his voice a low rumble cutting through the morning chatter. A glimpse of him on the docks, commanding his team with sharp hand signals and a posture that radiated authority. To me, he was less a man and more a local monument, a landmark you noted but never got close to. He was the town's protector, its shield. I was its archivist, its memory. We were opposite ends of the spectrum, existing in the same space, but in entirely different dimensions. My life was contained within the walls of the Port Blossom Maritime Museum and Archives, a small, hallowed space filled with the ghosts of shipwrecks and the diaries of sea captains' wives. I knew the history of every vessel that had ever foundered on our treacherous coastline. I could trace the lineage of every founding family through brittle, yellow documents. I was a custodian of stories, living vicariously through the ink of the past, because the present felt too loud, too unpredictable. Marcus Thorne was the present. Loud, unpredictable. When he walked into a room, the air pressure changed. People straightened up. They looked to him for answers, for safety, for orders. I, on the other hand, tended to shrink, to fade into the background, to become just another fixture. It was a comfortable role, an invisible one. There was a barrier between us, as vast and as cold as the ocean he patrolled. It was a wall of professional hierarchy, of social circles that never intersected, of personalities that were polar opposites. He was action. I was contemplation. He was the storm. I was the shelter. And from within my shelter, I watched him, this compelling, intimidating man, with a quiet, hopeless longing that I kept locked away, like the most fragile of my archives, too precious and too dangerous to ever bring into the light. It was a foolish, silent ache for a man who, I was certain, didn't even know my name. The disruption began, as it so often does in Port Blossom, with the sky. It turned a bruised, sickly shade of purple-gray. The gulls fell silent, and the sea, usually a constant, rhythmic companion, began to heave and sigh with a deep, unsettling restlessness. The weather reports escalated from a warning to an alert, and then to a full-blown evacuation order for all low-lying coastal areas. My museum, my sanctuary, was practically on the beach. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my carefully constructed calm. Not for myself, but for the history I guarded. The hand-drawn 16th-century nautical charts, the first mayor's personal logbook, the delicate scrimshaw. They were the town's soul, and they were about to be washed away. While others packed photo albums and essentials, I was frantically trying to move irreplaceable artifacts to the second floor, my hands shaking as the wind began to scream outside. The world dissolved into a fury of wind and water. The lights flickered and died. The roar was deafening, a physical presence that shook the very foundations of the old building. I heard a crash from downstairs and knew the bay windows had surrendered. The sea was inside my library. It was a violation, a desecration. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic trapped bird. That was when the heavy oak door was thrown open, not by the wind, but by a man. Rain and wind blasted in with him, and for a moment he was just a silhouette against the violent twilight. Then the beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the gloom, and it found my face. It was Marcus Thorne. "What in the hell are you still doing here?" His voice was a roar to match the storm, laced with a fury that felt intensely personal. He was soaked, his uniform plastered to his formidable frame, his face grim and set. I couldn't speak. I just clutched a stack of brittle ledgers to my chest, my knuckles white. He strode toward me, his boots sloshing in the water that now covered the floor. He didn't look at the priceless artifacts I was trying to save. He looked at me, and his eyes were blazing. The evacuation order was given hours ago. Are you insane? The archives? I finally managed to stammer, my voice thin and reedy. They're papers, he bit out, grabbing my arm. His grip was like iron. You're a person. Let's go. Now, he didn't give me a choice. He half-dragged me out of the museum and into the maelstrom. The force of the wind stole my breath. Debris flew through the air like shrapnel. The street was a river. He shielded me with his own body, a solid wall against the chaos. He pointed toward the cliffs that loomed over the town. The old lighthouse. It's the highest ground built to withstand this. We have to make it there. We were forced together, not by choice, not by circumstance, but by the raw, untamable power of the storm. He was my reluctant savior, and I was his foolish burden. The safe distance I had always maintained between us had been obliterated in an instant. Now, there was no distance at all. There was only his hand, clamped firmly around my arm, pulling me toward an unknown future through the heart of the storm. The inside of the lighthouse was a pocket of impossible stillness in the heart of the screaming chaos. The thick stone walls absorbed the storm's fury, reducing it to a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the soles of my feet. The air was cold, smelling of salt, damp stone, and ozone. Marcus slammed the heavy iron door shut, and the roar of the wind was suddenly muffled, distant. We were entombed. He leaned against the door for a moment, his chest heaving. Rainwater streamed from his hair, carving paths down his dirt-streaked face. For the first time, I saw something other than command in his eyes. Exhaustion, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that seemed to settle into the lines around his mouth. I stood there, dripping and shivering, clutching my ruined jacket. The silence between us was a physical weight, heavier than the storm itself. He pushed himself off the door and began to check the emergency supplies stored in a locker at the base of the spiral staircase. His movements were efficient, practiced. He found a generator, and with a few powerful tugs, a string of bare bulbs flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows up the curved walls. In that stark, unforgiving light, I could truly see him. Not the monument from the diner, but the man. There was a small, pale scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a detail I'd never been close enough to notice. His hands, as he unpacked emergency blankets, were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked, who fought, who held things together. There was a weariness in the set of his shoulders that his rigid posture couldn't quite hide. He turned and tossed a thick wool blanket at me. It smelled faintly of mothballs and cedar. Get dry, or as dry as you can. I wrapped it around myself. The rough will a welcome friction against my cold skin. I watched him as he moved about the small, circular space. He checked the radio, but it was only static. He checked his own handheld, shaking his head at the lack of signal. He was a man cut off from his command, from his team. A captain stranded on a stone island with a civilian he'd clearly deemed an idiot. My stomach was a knot of bees, a swarm of anxiety, and something else, something I refused to name. Proximity. Forced proximity. It was a trope from a romance novel, but in reality, it was just awkward and terrifying. I was trapped with the one person who could unravel my composure with a single glance. He finally sat down on the bottom step of the staircase, his back against the cold stone, and ran a hand over his face. He looked utterly spent. The facade of the unflappable lieutenant had cracked, just a little, revealing the tired man beneath. He opened a supply crate and pulled out 2 protein bars. He held one out to me. Eat. It was an order, not a suggestion. I hesitated, then moved toward him, my bare feet cold on the stone floor. I reached for the bar, my fingers trembling slightly. And as I took it, my hand brushed against his. It was nothing. An accident. A fleeting contact of skin on skin. But for me, It was a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity shot up my arm, straight to my chest, where my heart kicked into a frantic, panicked rhythm. Heat bloomed on my skin where we'd touched a searing brand. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. I think I stopped breathing. Did he feel it? I risked a glance at his face. His expression was unreadable, his gaze fixed on the ration bar still in his hand. But there was a new tension in his jaw, a stillness in his posture that hadn't been there a moment before. Or maybe I was just projecting. My mind was a feverish landscape of overanalysis, replaying that split-second touch on an endless loop. This is insane. He's just a man. It was just an accident. My internal monologue was frantic, trying to douse a fire with thimbles of water. A sudden, violent crack echoed from above, followed by the sound of shattering glass. We both flinched, looking up the winding staircase. A blast of wind and rain shot down the stairwell, extinguishing two of the lights and plunging us into deeper shadow. Marcus was on his feet in an instant, his exhaustion gone, replaced by pure, focused adrenaline. "Stay here," he commanded, grabbing a heavy-duty flashlight. But I was already moving. I wasn't going to be the useless burden. "I'm coming with you." He shot me a look of annoyance, but didn't argue. He needed the extra pair of hands. He led the way up the cast-iron steps, the flashlight beam cutting a path through the darkness. The wind howled through the broken window in the lantern room at the very top. Shards of thick, reinforced glass littered the floor. The great lens itself was miraculously intact, but the storm was now inside, tearing at the delicate machinery. "We have to board it up," he yelled over the din. "There are storm shutters in the maintenance closet." What happened next was a blur of frantic activity. He found the heavy wooden shutters while I cleared the glass, my hand surprisingly steady. We fought against the wind, a living, breathing monster that tried to tear the heavy wood from our grasp. At one point, a particularly violent gust slammed the half-secured shutter back. Marcus shoved me out of the way, taking the full impact himself. The edge of the wood caught his forearm, and he let out a sharp, guttural cry of pain. But he didn't stop. He gritted his teeth, reset his grip, and with a final, desperate shove, we managed to bolt the shutter into place. The roar of the wind was once again muted. We stood there in the near darkness of the lantern room, panting, our shoulders heaving. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice shaky. He didn't answer. He just leaned against the wall, his head bowed. The beam of his flashlight, lying on the floor, pointed toward his arm. I saw the dark stains spreading through the sleeve of his uniform. Blood. A lot of it. "Marcus," I said, his first name slipping out without my permission. I moved toward him. "Let me see." "It's fine," he rasped, but his voice lacked conviction. He was swaying slightly on his feet. "No, it's not." My own voice was firm, imbued with a strange, unfamiliar authority. "Sit down." Now, to my astonishment, he did. He sank onto a low bench, his face pale in the gloom. The power dynamic had shifted. He was no longer the commander, the savior. He was injured. He was vulnerable. And I, the quiet archivist, was the one who had to take charge. I found a first aid kit in the maintenance closet. It was old but well-stocked. I knelt before him, my heart a steady, determined drum. The frantic bird had finally calmed. I carefully cut away the bloody fabric of his sleeve with a pair of shears. The gash was deep, long, and brutally clean, right through the muscle of his forearm. It was bleeding sluggishly but steadily. He hissed in pain as I began to clean it with antiseptic wipes. "Hold still," I murmured, my focus narrowing to the task at hand. All my knowledge of meticulous, careful work, of handling fragile documents with a surgeon's precision, came to the forefront. My hands, which had trembled when I'd taken a protein bar from him, were now rock steady as I worked on his wound. He watched me, his expression a mixture of pain and something else. "Surprise?" I didn't look up to meet his gaze. I concentrated on applying a pressure bandage, my movements deft and sure. He had to trust me. He had no other choice. In that moment, in that storm-tossed tower, we were equals. No, more than that. For a few precious minutes, he was in my care, and it felt right, terrifyingly, breathtakingly right. The lighthouse became our world. A tower of stone and silence, suspended in a universe of violent motion. Downstairs, in the weak electric light, I finished tending to his arm. The first aid kit had butterfly closures, and I used them to pull the edges of the wound together, my touch gentle, deliberate. He never flinched, but I could feel the tension radiating from him, a tightly coiled spring of pain and control. His skin was warm beneath my fingertips. When I was done, a clumsy but secure bandage wrapping his forearm, I sat back on my heels. The silence rushed back in, thick and charged. The only sounds were the distant moan of the wind and the faint, rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the tower. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough, low. It was the first time he had spoken to me without a command attached. I used to volunteer for the medical corps in college. I lied. It was a stupid, small lie, born of a desire to seem more competent than I was. The truth was I'd learned from old naval surgeons' journals in the archives. He gave a small, humorless smile, a slight upward twitch of his lips. "Figures. The archivist knows everything." It wasn't a compliment. Not really, but it wasn't an insult either. It was just an observation, a recognition. He saw me. He was finally, truly seeing me. We sat there for what felt like hours, not speaking. I was acutely aware of every small detail. The way the light carved shadows under his cheekbones. The steady, slow rise and fall of his chest. The sheer, solid presence of him in the small space. My own solitude, the comfortable cloak I usually wore, felt thin and useless. It offered no protection from this. From him. He broke the silence first. His gaze was distant, fixed on the stone wall opposite him. I had a man get swept off the jetty once. During a squall, not even a storm like this. Young kid, barely 20. We got him back. But for 3 minutes he was gone. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. His voice was different now. Stripped of its authority, it was just the voice of a man. A tired man. "The paperwork," he continued, a dry, bitter edge to his tone. "You can't imagine the paperwork. Every second has to be accounted for. Every decision justified in triplicate. They want you to turn chaos into a neat, orderly report." He shook his head slowly. "You can't. You can't." He was talking to me, confiding in me. The lieutenant was gone. It was just Marcus Thorne, a man burdened by the weight of responsibility he carried. He was showing me the vulnerability he kept hidden behind his uniform, behind his commanding presence. He finally turned his head and looked at me. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were clear and direct. There was no artifice left. "I see you, at the diner. You're always at the corner booth, reading. You never order the special." My breath caught in my throat. It was such a small thing, such a mundane detail. I always order the tuna melt. Always. But he had noticed. All those times I thought I was invisible, a piece of the scenery, he had been watching. The realization sent a tremor through me, a seismic shift in my understanding of my own small world. I like the tuna melt," I whispered, my voice barely audible. A real smile touched his lips this time. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines, making him look younger. I figured the space between us seemed to shrink, the air growing thick and warm. My heart was doing a slow, heavy drum roll against my ribs. This is it. This is the moment where everything changes. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze dropping to my mouth for a fraction of a second before returning to my eyes. The movement was so small, so subtle, but it felt like a tectonic plate shifting beneath me. "Leo," he said, and my name on his lips was a revelation. He knew my name. I don't know what this is." His confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest. He wasn't talking about the storm anymore. He was talking about us. About the strange, undeniable current that had been humming between us since he dragged me from the museum. "I'm a simple man," he went on, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a rough murmur. "I follow charts. I read the weather. I fix what's broken. It's all cause and effect, action and reaction." He gestured vaguely between us with his good hand. "But there's no chart for this. I don't understand it." He was confused. He was admitting his confusion, his lack of control, to me. The strong, silent man was giving me his words, his vulnerability. It was a gift more precious than any artifact in my archive. And then he closed the small distance between us. He moved slowly, hesitantly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop him. I didn't. I couldn't. I was frozen, mesmerized, caught in the gravity of his approach. His hand came up, not his injured one, and his fingers gently brushed against my jaw. His touch was tentative, questioning. His calloused fingertips were rough against my skin, and the contrast sent a shiver through my entire body. His eyes searched mine, asking a question he didn't seem to know how to voice. I gave him the answer. I leaned into his touch, just a fraction of an inch, but it was enough. His breath hitched. He closed his eyes, and then he kissed me. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss like the ones in books or movies. It was slow. It was hesitant. It was breathtakingly honest. It was a kiss of pure discovery, a quiet exploration in the eye of the storm. His lips were chapped from the wind and salt, and they were unbelievably soft. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and uncertainty and a deep, unspoken longing that I recognized as my own. It was a question and an answer all at once, a confession that needed no words. And in the quiet heart of the raging hurricane, I kissed him back, and my entire world, the one I had so carefully built and guarded, fell away into nothing. The morning came with an eerie, unnatural quiet. The wind had died, leaving behind a world scoured clean and broken. A pale, watery sunlight filtered through the grimy, boarded-up window of the lantern room, painting the space in stripes of gray and muted gold. The storm was over. I woke up on the floor, curled in my wool blanket, my head resting on a bundled-up jacket. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The storm, the lighthouse, Marcus, the kiss. My eyes flew open. He was already awake, standing by the iron door at the base of the tower, peering out through a small peephole. His back was to me. His posture was rigid, military straight. The vulnerable man from the night before was gone. In his place stood Lieutenant Thorne. A cold dread, heavy and sickening, began to pool in my stomach. The fragile intimacy we had shared felt like a dream, something conjured by the storm and the darkness, something that couldn't possibly survive the light of day. He must have heard me stir, because he turned. His face was a mask, his expression shuttered and distant. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked at a point on the wall, just over my head. "Chopper's on its way," he said. His voice was clipped professional. "All business. They'll be here within the hour." My heart, which had felt so full and alive just hours before, felt like a lead weight in my chest. I sat up, the blanket pooling around my waist. The cold of the stone floor seeped into my bones. "Marcus," I said, my voice small. He flinched just slightly at the sound of his name. He finally looked at me, but his gaze was guarded, impenetrable. "We should get ready," and that was it. No acknowledgement of what had happened. No mention of the kiss, of the confessions whispered in the dark. It was as if a curtain had been drawn, a wall rebuilt between us, thicker and higher than ever before. He started packing the remains of the emergency supplies into the crate, his movements brisk and efficient, a man eager to escape. I felt a wave of shame so powerful it made me dizzy. What had I done? What had I thought would happen? He was a hero, a commander. I was the town librarian. He was confused, exhausted, injured. I had taken advantage of his vulnerability. The narrative my anxiety spun was vicious and immediate. The kiss was a mistake, a moment of madness brought on by the storm, an aberration. The self-recrimination was a bitter acid in my throat. I was a fool, a romantic, naive fool who had mistaken a moment of shared trauma for something more. He was regretting it. It was so obvious in the stiff set of his shoulders, in his refusal to look at me, in the cold, professional tone that had replaced the warmth of the night before. When the thumping sound of the helicopter blades grew louder, the sound of rescue felt like a death knell. A medic came down on a winch, and my brief examination was a blur. Marcus handled everything, his voice calm and authoritative as he gave his report. He was back in his element, in control. He never once looked at me. They winched me up first. As I was lifted away from the lighthouse, away from our stone tower, I looked down. Marcus was watching me ascend, his face unreadable. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, regret, confusion, maybe even pain. Then it was gone, replaced by the blank mask of command. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, and then turned away to speak to the medic. The flight to the temporary shelter at the town hall was short. The world below was a landscape of devastation. But the only wreckage I could see was the smoking ruin of the hope that had ignited inside me just last night. The next 3 days were a unique form of torture. My old solitude, which had once been a comfort, was now a gaping void. It was an absence. The silence in my corner of the shelter wasn't peaceful. It was deafening, filled with the ghost of his voice, the memory of his touch. Every time a man in uniform walked past, my heart would leap into my throat, a frantic, hopeful spasm, only to crash back down when I saw it wasn't him. I replayed our time in the lighthouse over and over, analyzing every word, every glance, every silence. I was a historian sifting through the artifacts of a dead civilization, trying to piece together a truth that kept shifting. Had I imagined it all? The vulnerability in his eyes? The honesty in his voice? The tenderness in his kiss? My logical mind told me to forget it. It was a fluke, a trauma bond, an anomaly. But my heart, that foolish, stubborn organ, refused to believe it. It clung to the memory of his lips on mine, to the feeling of his skin beneath my fingers. It insisted that what had happened in that tower was real. The silence from him was my answer. It was a clear, unambiguous statement. Forget it happened. It meant nothing. By the third day, I had almost managed to convince myself to accept it. I would rebuild my quiet life. I would go back to my books, to my archives. I would put Marcus Thorne back on his pedestal and learn to live with the familiar, dull ache of unrequited longing. It was a pain I knew, a pain I could manage. It was safer than the sharp, agonizing pain of rejection. I had just accepted my fate, resigned to my old life, when he appeared. He stood in the doorway of the bustling town hall shelter, and for a moment I didn't recognize him. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing faded jeans and a dark gray sweater that was slightly frayed at the cuffs. Without the crisp lines and insignia of his office, he looked different, younger, softer, more approachable, and just as lost as I felt. He scanned the crowded room, his eyes searching. My heart stopped. It literally just stopped beating for a second. I wanted to shrink, to disappear into the sea of cots and displaced people. But I was frozen, pinned in place by his gaze when it finally found me. He didn't smile. His expression was grim, his jaw tight. He walked toward me, his steps measured and deliberate, weaving through the chaos of the shelter. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of my cot, casting a long shadow over me. The people around us faded away. The noise of his shelter receded to a dull hum. It was just him and me, and the suffocating weight of 3 days of silence. "Leo," he said, his voice low and strained. I couldn't find my own voice. I just looked at him, my mind a blank slate of shock and fear and a tiny, treacherous spark of hope. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and the lines of exhaustion I'd seen in the lighthouse were etched even deeper into his face. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. He looked like he felt as wrecked as I did. Can we go outside?" he asked. "I need to talk to you." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. I followed him out of the noise and heat of the hall and into the crisp, clean air of the afternoon. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a startling contrast to the debris and destruction that still littered the town square. We walked in silence to a bench overlooking the harbor, where salvage operations were already underway. He didn't sit. He stood in front of me, his hands shoved into his pockets, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He looked like a man preparing to face a firing squad. "I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out in a rush, "for how I acted. At the lighthouse. After. I was a coward. The apology hit me like a physical blow. It was the last thing I had expected. I had prepared myself for excuses, for a gentle letdown, for him to tell me it was a mistake. But not this. Not an admission of his own fear. He finally turned to face me, and the vulnerability was back in his eyes, raw and unguarded. "I'm a simple man, Leo." He repeated the words he'd said in the tower, and my heart clenched. "I see a problem. I fix it. I follow orders. My whole life is structured. It makes sense. There are rules. There are manuals for everything. Ship maintenance, rescue protocols, storm preparations. There's a procedure for everything." He took a deep breath, the sound of it ragged. "But there's no manual for this. For you. For what happened between us. For how I feel." He ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "I've never felt that way before. For anyone, man or woman. I didn't know what to do with it." His words were a balm on my bruised and battered heart. It wasn't that it meant nothing. It was that it meant too much. "My whole life," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I've been one thing. A son, a brother, a Coast Guard officer, a straight man. It's like being given a map at birth. You just follow the roads that are laid out for you. And then you happened, and you're a road that's not on my map. And it scared the hell out of me." He was laying himself bare. He was handing me his confusion, his fear, his entire identity crisis, and trusting me not to break it. The courage it took for this man, this pillar of strength and command, to stand in front of me and admit he was lost, it was staggering. It was the bravest thing I had ever witnessed. "So I did what I was trained to do," he said, his voice laced with self-disgust. "I compartmentalized. I retreated to what I knew. The mission, the uniform, the rules. I shut down. And I hurt you. And I haven't slept for 3 days thinking about the look on your face when they lifted you out of that tower." My own fear began to recede, replaced by a wave of empathy so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified, just like I was. We were both just standing on the edge of something new and vast and frightening, and he had blinked first. I finally found my voice. "I was scared too," I said softly. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate kind of hope. "I thought I'd imagined it." I continued, the words tumbling out now. "I thought it was just the storm, that I had misread everything. That it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "Being a coward afterward, that was the mistake. The kiss was the only thing that made sense in the last 72 hours." He took a step closer, and then another, until he was standing right in front of me. He was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him. He didn't touch me. He just looked at me, his stormy eyes filled with a question. Then he did something that must have cost him every ounce of his courage. He slowly, deliberately held out his hand. It was an offering, an invitation, a promise. "I don't know where that road goes, Leo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't have a map for this, but I want to find out. With you. If you let me." He swallowed hard. Can we just walk? On the beach? I don't want to hide anymore." My hand was shaking as I lifted it. The world seemed to hold its breath as my fingers touched his. His hand closed around mine, his grip firm and warm and sure. It felt like coming home. It felt like an anchor in a storm. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, Marcus. We can walk." And as we walked away from the wreckage of the town, our hands linked together, I knew that the storm hadn't destroyed my life. It had just cleared a new path, a road not on any map. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to see where it would lead. The weeks that followed were a delicate, tentative dance of discovery. We walked on the storm-ravaged beaches, our footprints side by side in the wet sand. We talked for hours, sitting in his starkly furnished apartment or my cluttered, temporary room. We unspooled the stories of our lives, the quiet, bookish boy and the restless, duty-bound man, finding surprising points of intersection in our solitary worlds. There was an honesty between us, born from the terror and truth of the lighthouse. We had met each other at our most vulnerable, and there was no sense in pretending to be anything other than what we were. He was still learning how to navigate the new territory of his own heart, and he was disarmingly frank about his fears and his confusion. I, in turn, was learning to step out from behind the walls I had so carefully built, learning to trust that this incredible, impossible thing was real and not a fleeting dream. Our first official date was at the corner diner. He insisted. He walked in his uniform, and held the door for me. He led me to my usual corner booth, and when the waitress came, he ordered the tuna melt for me before I could even open my mouth. It was a small gesture, but it was public. It was a statement. He sat across from me, met my eyes over the chipped Formica tabletop, and he smiled. A real, unguarded smile that made my heart ache with a joy so fierce it was almost painful. In that moment, I knew he was not just brave in storms. He was brave in the quiet moments, too, and that was a different, more profound kind of courage. Slowly, my apartment was pieced back together. The museum was still undergoing major repairs, but my small living space above it was eventually declared habitable. The day I moved back in, Marcus was there. He carried the heaviest boxes, his quiet, solid presence filling the rooms that had once been my solitary refuge. They no longer felt like a refuge. They felt like a home. Now, months later, the morning light streams through my clean bedroom window, painting the room in soft, gentle colors. The scent of coffee is brewing in the small kitchen, a rich, comforting aroma that has become the soundtrack to my mornings. I'm not alone. I turn my head on the pillow and look at him. Marcus is asleep beside me, his face relaxed in a way I rarely see when he's awake. The hard lines of command are smoothed away, and he looks younger, more peaceful. His bare arm is slung over my waist, a heavy, warm weight that feels like an anchor. His breathing is a deep, steady rhythm, a counterpoint to the distant sound of the sea. His uniform is hanging neatly on the back of my bedroom door. It's a strange, incongruous sight next to my worn cardigans and tweed jackets. It's a symbol of the world he comes from, a world of structure and duty. But here in my bed, in my quiet space, he's just Marcus. My Marcus. I think back to the man I used to be. The quiet, anxious archivist who watched the world from a safe distance, who cataloged the lives of others because he was too afraid to live his own. My life was a neat, orderly collection of facts and histories, predictable and safe. I thought that was all I wanted. I thought it was enough. I was wrong. Marcus was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the storm that wrecked my tidy, lonely life. He didn't just break down the door of my museum. He broke down the doors to rooms inside myself I didn't even know were locked. He forced me out into the chaos, and in doing so, he showed me what it was to truly live. To be terrified and brave all at once. To risk everything for a connection that felt more real than the solid ground beneath my feet. He stirs in his sleep, his arm tightening around me, pulling me closer. He murmurs my name, his voice thick and drowsy, and buries his face in the crook of my neck. I feel the soft tickle of his hair against my skin, the warmth of his breath. The frantic trapped bird in my chest is long gone. In its place is a quiet, steady warmth, a sense of peace so profound it feels like a homecoming. Some storms don't come to destroy. They come to clear a path. Marcus Thorne was my hurricane, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for the beautiful, terrifying, life-altering wreckage he left in his wake. He is my new beginning, my safe harbor, the unexpected answer to a longing I never dared to speak aloud. And this, I realize as I settle into the warmth of his embrace. This is what it feels like to be truly, finally saved.